Ms. PAC-MAN was an arcade game, came out in 1982, released by Namco, of course, developed by... Actually, wasn't developed by Namco. Ms. PAC-MAN's weird. It was developed by, I don't know, some random company that just thought they would modify Pac-Man and somehow didn't get sued. Anyways, this video's not really about that. It's more about just the fact that I have 3 versions of Ms. PAC-MAN here. I just happened to notice. I've got this little mini arcade, my arcade thing. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's basically a little miniature arcade cabinet thingy with like an NES on a chip, NoaC. So it's kind of like a hardware NES emulator, and it's running a slightly modified ROM version of the NES game Ms. PAC-MAN. But then I remembered there's actually like 2 versions of Ms. PAC-MAN for the NES. Because there's like a Namco published one, and then there's the Tengen one, and they're quite different. So I thought we'd take a look at that. To start off, here's a quick look at the little My Arcade thing, playing Ms. PAC-MAN, and just kind of keep note of how everything looks, the layout. It's not like a portrait screen. It's it's in landscape, and you've got your score, top right, and just the orange text for score, and then the score. Just the way it's all laid out. And then when we switch over to the NES version, the Namco published NES version, you'll see it's basically the same game. So yeah, as you can see by the layout of the screen, the sound effects, the music, this is the exact same version that's running on that My Arcade thing. It's slightly tweaked. The title screen's a little different, mainly because you don't have like a 2-player option. So they had to change the title screen a little bit anyways. But other than that, it's the exact same ROM. This one's weird because this one was released by Namco in 1993, which is insanely late for the NES. Super NES was out by 1991. Obviously, 1993, that was way late in the NES life, and that's when this one came out. Tengen released their version of Ms. PAC-MAN for the NES in 1988, and it's very different. It's a completely different layout. We'll look at that later. We'll also look at the Genesis version. Tengen released a Genesis version, which is very similar to the NES, Tengen's NES version. But this is the Namco version on the NES. I guess this one's my favorite, although there's a lot of things about the Tengen version that are better. But this one looks... Well, I was going to say this one looks more like the arcade version. I mean, obviously it's in a landscape orientation, so they had to move like the high score, from the top of the screen to the side to kind of just make it all fit. But I like the style and the sprite work and everything. It's very similar to the arcade machine. Seems to play pretty well. The controls are 90%. They're not quite as good as the Tengen version. I'll talk about that when we get to it. But they're perfectly fine. They're perfectly playable. I actually found it more playable on the My Arcade than it is on the NES emulator here. I'm playing this on an emulator. And with emulators, there's always just a little bit of controller input lag. And there's always a little bit of, you're always going to have a little bit of lag on your screen, or especially on your TV. And that's, just part of HDMI in general. That signal being digital, and the TV has a lot of post-processing that it's always doing to the image. There's always a little bit of, I guess you would call it the output lag. You always have a little bit of input lag with, USB controllers. All that USB stack is going through the drivers, and it's being pulled, going through your chipset and going through the operating system. There's always going to be a little bit of input lag with the controllers on emulation, and there's, probably always going to be a little bit of output lag on the, the HDMI going to a television, especially. Probably a little bit less on a monitor in general. In general, a computer monitor's got less input lag than a television, and I seem to notice that here. So, playing this on like a Retro Pi or whatever hooked up to the TV, I noticed a little bit of the input lag with the controls, and then I switched over to on a PC with a monitor, and I noticed it a little bit less. But it's there if you look for it. And that's kind of the funny thing about the My Arcade is it's a Nintendo on a chip. And that's not software emulation. The controls aren't being seen through an operating system through a USB system. You know what I mean? With a Nintendo on a chip, it's basically a hardware clone of the NES hardware. You're not running software on top of an operating system, and so the controller's buttons, those inputs are going directly to like the CPU, just like it would on a real NES. And so that little My Arcade thing, it's very playable. There's no input lag at all. So playing it on that is funny because it's awkward because it's so small. But on the flip side, you've got like no input lag, and then you go to an emulator on a TV, and there's a little bit of input lag that you have to get used to. But anyways, it's pretty good, and I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, about emulation. The D-pad, it's also a test of your D-pad. Input lag and your D-pad and everything with this game's got to be spot on. I originally played it on the Retro Pi thing with using a Genesis 6-button controller. And the Genesis 6-button, the D-pad on the 6-button controller, it's really, what's the word I'm looking for? Rocky? It's loose. It's really loose. It's got a lot of play. It rocks around a lot. And it's actually good for certain types of games. But when you just need 4 directional, it's Pac-Man. You just need like 4 directional directions to be just as precise as possible. And it was okay, but it wasn't as good as a Super Nintendo controller. So first I tried it with the Genesis controller. It was, I hate to say terrible, but everything combined, like the input lag of emulation and the going to HDMI, the output lag, and using a Genesis controller, it was like the worst possible combination. And then I switched to a Super Nintendo controller to see if I could do a little bit better with that, and I did a little bit better. And then I switched to a PC, actually just using a keyboard, and I did a little bit better. I've never done as good on this software emulation as I've done on the My Arcade. The highest score I've ever gotten on on Ms.PAC-MAN is on the My Arcade was like 32,000. And I'm obviously not a professional gamer by any means. The professional people that are pros, when they play Pac-Man, they get into the 100,000s. I'm curious what the average. I'm curious what's your score in Pac-Man, in Ms.PAC-MAN. Anyways, I'm also curious, how different the arcade is compared to the NES versions, and not even the Tengen version. I know the Tengen version is like so different that the score is just not going to compare. Like, you can't compare the scores between them. But I'm wondering how close. Like, if you can get 32,000 points on the NES Namco version, can you get 32,000 points in the arcade version? How different is the scoring and the timing and all that, and the speed? This one seems pretty close in speed to the arcade from what I remember, but I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen this in a real arcade, so... The Tengen version. I don't know, Wikipedia said it came out in 1988, and the title screen there just said copyright 1990. So now I don't know what to believe. But anyways, let's just say it came out many, many years before the Namco version. Did we need the Pac-Man on NES in 1993? I don't know. Did Namco should have had that out way earlier, and we wouldn't have needed the Tengen version. You know, these are unlicensed NES games. And did they have the rights for Pac-Man? Well, again, Ms.PAC-Man's a weird thing all on its own. Again, it was originally a thing that you modified the original Pac-Man arcade, and it turned it into Ms.PAC-Man. But anyways, this one, obviously, the big thing you can see right away is that it scrolls. It scrolls vertically to give you the vertical aspect ratio of the playfield that you had on in the arcade with the vertical screen. So that's kind of weird. You can't see where all the ghosts are at all times on the screen. You also can't always see your score or how many lives you have. When the screen scrolled up to the top, you can't see how many lives you have. And when the screen scrolled to the bottom, you can't see what your score is. I remember the first time playing this, it was like, where's my lives? How do I know how many lives I have? Because I took a quick glance around the screen and I couldn't see it, and then I realized, oh wow, that scrolls with the screen. Like, you think the score and the lives would have been a non-part of the screen that scrolled? But whatever. This one has some really positive attributes about it. It's super fast. It runs really fast. And the controls, like I said about the Namco one, it's like 90% there. This is why I can say that, is because the controls in this one are so spot on. In the Namco one, you kind of have to hold the direction. Like, when you want to go up, you kind of got to start holding up and hold it until you move up. And I just find that I always hold the direction I'm going in. Whereas on the Tengen one, you can just tap. Like, you tap right, tap up. He's walking up, and you tap right when you want him to change right. And you just let him go until you want to tap another direction. And it takes those inputs like every single time. If you try and do that on the Namco one, you're going to miss a lot of turns. You're like, I know I hit up, and he didn't turn up. She, I should say. But in the Tengen version, you do not get that ever. Like, every single time you hit a direction, she's in that direction. So, yeah, it's super fast, and the controls are super, super tight. So, that's good. I just don't know if I like the scrolling thing. I don't know. Which one do you guys prefer? The Namco or the Tengen? I should mention that this Tengen version also has, like, some extra features. Whether you like them or not, they're there if you want to use them. Like, if you just want the straight arcade version, it's basically there. But there's some versions, like there's a 2-player cooperative mode, which is, I guess, cool. I haven't tried that. I should. I will. But yeah, there's just some extras to it, which could be seen as a good thing. I don't know. Again, I don't know what version I like more. I've played the Namco one more, and that was the first one I played. So I always liked it, and I always assumed that the Tengen one was, like, really bad, but it's not. It's actually really good. think I like the Namco one better. And last but not least, I wanted to show, at least quickly, the Genesis version. This is like the first time I played it. I didn't even remember if I owned it. It's just one of those games I had to go look. I had to go double check and see, because I've never played it before. But while we're looking at the other Ms.PAC-MANs, I thought for sure we'll look at this one. It's basically the NES version with upgraded graphics. And the thing is, like, I don't know if I really care for these updated graphics. I kind of prefer just the way the original arcade sprites looked. And, you know, here they tried to kind of give them a little bit more color and depth, I guess. It still scrolls the exact same way as the NES version, meaning you can't see your score or your lives at all times. So it's basically the NES version, just on the Genesis. It did not run correctly in the emulator at all. I don't know if you can tell by this footage, but she is missing almost all of my up and down commands. So yeah, there's a lot of times when I go to move up or down and it does not take it. So is that an input lag combined with output lag issue? Or is that, I don't know if it's an issue with this 6-button controller, maybe? There are some Genesis games that act weird when you use the 6-button controller on them. But I just think, I have a feeling it's just the emulator. It's just another prime example of when emulation's not perfect. It was missing a lot of my up and down inputs for sure. And it was weird because it kind of came and went in little bursts. Like it would go 10 seconds where it missed every single one, and then it would go 10 seconds where it got them all. So yeah, like you can see right now, it's just insane. She will not go up. And then she finally goes up, and then it seems fine for a little while. Yeah, weird, eh? Obviously an emulation problem. Might be better on my PC with a monitor, but that was on the RetroPie, which usually seems okay. But for whatever reason, yeah, this one's pretty bad. But again, it's basically the NES version with updated graphics. A lot of people seem to like it, so I thought I would show it.